I am happy to be here with a good personal friend of mine, Glenn Kreiner, who I want to share also his title. He is the Ellis Skaggs Presidential Chair in Business Ethics at the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah. And Glenn has been involved with Stop Stigma Together since the earliest of days. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. Super glad to be here, Sal.
Tell us how you got involved with Stop Stigma Together.
Sure. Well, a few years ago when the initiative was first starting, the university president used to be our dean, and he connected me with Mark. He was the head of the Mental Health Institute at the University of Utah and told me about this initiative that was getting started. And so I went to a very early meeting of some Utah leaders focusing on stigma. And I was really impressed with what I saw there in terms of the vision for what Stop Stigma Together could be. And so afterward, I let Mark know that I'd be interested in helping out. My background lends itself to it because I've been studying stigma for over 25 years from a research side, typically in organizations and workplaces. So it seemed to me a way to apply a lot of the academic research that I have been doing for a long time in a very practical way and in a topic that we really needed to do more in society.
And say a little bit about the stigma studying that you had been doing.
Yeah. So typically I've looked at stigma as has to do with workplaces, generally speaking. So I've done research studies on workers that were stigmatized either because of the jobs that they do, like what we might call a dirty work job, or maybe they're stigmatized because of some personal qualities that they have, if they have an intellectual disability or physical disability, or maybe it's the industry that the organization is in that's stigmatized. I've also done research on organizations that become stigmatized because of scandal. So usually I have been looking at some sort of workplace or organizational based stigma over the years. And the Stop Stigma Together initiative, looking at mental health very broadly, it absolutely includes a lot of organization based stigma, but also a lot of person based stigma.
And so you got involved in the earliest of days before we did our design studio. What was it like for you in those early days? What as you were kind of looking around and investigating what was going on? What did you see and what piqued your interest?
Yeah. What piqued my interest at that very first meeting, first of all, was the huge need that we have in society to address mental health stigma. And it's not something that I was super cognizant about before that meeting, but became aware through the short presentations and the testimonials, so to speak, at that meeting of how important it was. And I saw that there were a lot of things in the research that not just that I had done, but that many, many scholars had done over the decades on stigma that could be applied to mental health stigma. And so just the idea that we could have an organization of organizations all working together toward this was fascinating to me. But beyond the idea, the people involved, I was just very attracted to the way they all were presenting the ideas. And I could tell as you and Mark interacted and spoke to the audience that it wasn't just, well, here's my job and I'm just kind of doing it, check the box, that there was a tremendous amount of passion. And to me, I like to be at that intersection of passion and competence, right? Like we have something important to do and we know how to do it. To me, that's the space I want to be in.
And you got involved as a leader and in a creative capacity right away, and you brought a lot of skill to your work. What I saw when I was first meeting you was that you had skills in organizational development, you had skills in facilitation, you had skills in adult learning, you were able to construct exercises for participants at our events that were engaging, meaningful, fun, and also got the job done. So you were bringing a lot to the table. What is it you were hoping to get out of it at that point?
First of all, thank you. You're very kind, very generous person to say all those nice things. I guess two things for me, something that struck me as I was thinking about really diving in and becoming deeply involved. When I looked at different phases of my life and my career, it was really striking to me how different experiences and training that I had had really could be brought to bear on the issue of mental health stigma. So my undergraduate is in communications. So I studied a lot about communications. I in my master's degree, which is organizational behavior. I just studied a lot about teams and facilitation, organizational development. And then with stigma and identity being two of my main areas as a scholar, it was really interesting to me how all of these things were coming together. So that helps ignite the passion for me, because then to the second part of your question, what do I hope to get out of it? I want to apply the things that my co-authors and peer researchers have been able to figure out in terms of stigma and apply those things to real world situations. So to me, it's very gratifying to be able to take a body of research, again, not just me, but dozens and dozens of other people over the decades, take that research to try to solve these real world problems. So to me, that's the reward, right? And of seeing the payoff of how we can shift attitudes, how we can shift behaviors, how we can change people's really behavior toward seeking the help that they need, but also helping other people get the help that they need. To me, that's tremendously rewarding.
So there was this real alignment of values for you between what you care about and what this work was providing. What about with your job? I mean, you've given an extraordinary amount of time, and I've seen that some of this goes back to your work in the business school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate in the sense that at this stage of my career, part of having an endowed professorship is that endowment allows us to have wiggle room, so to speak, in how we spend our time, to be able to look for things like this that can translate to real world solutions. We keep what I call the day job is, conducting primary research and disseminating that to our academic peers. That's the day job of what we do as a research institution. But we also have this component of trying to solve real world problems. And that's what that endowed professorship allows me to do, the sort of the wiggle room and time where I get to decide how to spend that time. And so to me, there's not going to be a better offer on the table for me of how to spend the time, because it's a way to take the research that I and others have done and apply it to this. So I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I have that kind of buffer to be able to devote the time to it.
One of the things that I really value about you is your ability to deal with ambiguity. In fact, I think you enjoy ambiguity and you like leaning into it and the creative foment that can kind of come out of figuring out how to handle it, which is, there's a lot of that in a grand challenge. And you have really leaned into that. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important issue because, as you and I have talked about this before, that you and I both have a very high tolerance for ambiguity.
Right.
But we have to keep that in mind because most people don't have as high a tolerance for ambiguity. And so when you're trying to lead a grand challenge, having that self-awareness of how comfortable you are with ambiguity, I think, is really important. Because while it's helpful for a subset of the leadership and a subset of the participants to have that, we have to recognize that the majority of people are going to need things that are much more concrete. They're going to need specific goals. They're going to need specific measurable deliverables, right? And they might want, more spreadsheets than my brain likes to deal with, but that's the reality of getting things accomplished. So I think some of that self-awareness is really important around tolerance for ambiguity. And then also finding people to have on the team that can put up with that level of ambiguity, for lack of a better phrasing, but also translate it into actionable items. So this is another one of the things that we're blessed with, I think, at Stop Stigma Together, is that we have such a diversity of thought in our leadership team. And we have people who can translate ideas into concrete action steps and build accountability systems and things like that, which I'm not good at all. Right? So just from team design, from a grand challenge lens, when you're trying to put something like this together, some of that basic teams 101 really needs to be in place of bringing people together who have the diverse and complementary skill sets. Because if everyone has a great tolerance for ambiguity and you're just sort of this playground, but nothing gets done, there's no addressing the grand challenge. by contrast, if you have people who are more action-oriented but don't have that broader tolerance for ambiguity, that their leadership team is going to have a hard time on their own managing the grand challenge because there are a lot of ambiguities inherent in a grand challenge. If there weren't ambiguities, it literally would not be a grand challenge. It is baked into the nature of it. Whatever the problem is, the grand challenge is addressing, it hasn't been solved before. It hasn't been solved before because people haven't figured out how to do it. Therefore, you're going to be dealing with a lot of ambiguity.
And that's one of the big tensions that I often face, which is that people want to projectize the grand challenge. Oh, let's just figure out what the steps are and then execute them. And it's challenging to explain that we're doing something that's never been done before. And so we don't really know what the next steps are. We have an idea and we can lean into it, but then we have to improvise because we're going to hit obstacles that have always stopped all of the other efforts in this regard.
Yeah.
We've done a lot in the last 3.5 years. As you look back on the last 3.5 years, what are some of the major achievements that come to your mind?
I think the simple creation of the infrastructure is a major accomplishment. And by infrastructure, there's a lot of moving parts there, but the executive committee, our national leadership steering team, the task forces that are created, I think of those as sort of three sets of entities in our structure that have been created and have really gotten off to a running start. If you think about the horsepower of people on the executive committee and the national leadership steering team, this is a very broad, diverse set of eyes on the topic that are working together. And when you think about our task forces, just the wealth of areas that we're covering in the task forces, criminal justice, marginalized communities, the list goes on of types of people, pockets of society, corners of society, all these different areas that we're trying to represent. Just getting that off of the ground and moving is a major effort. So I think that's a major accomplishment. Another one had been the summits that we've been able to do, some of them broad in scope and scale, and others more targeted, like children, youth, and family, which had a narrower focus, but still high impact. So I think our summits, and you've put it this way before, which I agree, convening is one of our superpowers. Whether that's a convening of an in-person summit or convening of a task force that's meeting monthly virtually, working on projects, bringing people together to tackle problems that they couldn't do on their own or that their organization couldn't do on their own. That's one of our superpowers. And I think we should be very pleased, very proud with the degree we've been able to do those convenings.
Yeah, I agree. For our listeners, let's just break down the executive committee, the national leadership steering team, and the task forces in terms of what they are. So the executive committee, we have yourself, we have Mark Rappaport, the CEO of the Huntsville Mental Health Institute. We have the Parthenon Management Group, meeting planning firm that really, their remit goes way beyond meeting planning. For example, they do strategy and things like that. And some of their members are policy wonks, people who are really deep into some of these spaces. And who am I leaving out for? Oh, and Daryl Kirch, the executive advisor to Mark Rappaport. So that's our executive. We talk a little bit about our national leadership steering team.
Yeah. Here we have representatives from, I want to say 25, 30 organizations in the mental health space, very broadly defined. So some of the folks on the steering team are from very small organizations with a handful of people who are targeted in a particular area around mental health. Some of the people on our steering team are heads of or very high up in major mental health organizations with thousands of employees. And we also have representatives from federal agencies, many types of not-for-profits, educational institutions, etc. And the idea of that steering team is meeting monthly, providing big picture feedback on where we're headed with the grand challenge, but also an opportunity for all of the members of that leadership team to hear from each other, projects they're working on, findings from their research, opportunities to cross-pollinate and collaborate amongst themselves. So they're both helping / serving the grand challenge as leaders, but they're also helping each other by being a part of this group where they can learn and talk and break down the silos that often exist across these mental health organizations.
And then we have our task forces. I think we have 9 of them right now, and I'll see. Put myself on the spot, see if I can name them. I might need some help. So we have policy, criminal justice, marginalized communities, children, youth, and family, rural, workplace. There's 3 more. I'll come up with them before we're done, unless you can think of one off the top of your head.
Yeah, did you say Did you say
Substance use disorders. That's a new one. Yep.
entertainment?
Oh yeah, and journalism. Those are the other 3: entertainment, media, and journalism. And these task forces bring in partners from, I mean, all these different sectors. Entertainment and media. Well, we have showrunners from major TV shows and movie producers, and journalism. We have the Carter Center involved, and so on and so forth. We have so many amazing OSHA in the workplace one, One Mind at Work. And we not only have volunteers on these task forces who are helping to fight stigma in these various ways, but we have volunteer leaders, like at workplace. We have One Mind at Work. We have, tell me the young woman's name who's there.
It's Ahelia, right? So one of the heads of One Mind at Work, a wonderful not-for-profit organization that goes in and actually helps organizations assess how they are doing on mental health in their very own organization. So they hear, how's your culture doing? How are your policies doing? What's the messaging from your leadership like? And it allows a very thorough investigation of where you are and provides guidance of how to move the organization forward to improve the way that they handle mental health for their employees.
And thank you for reminding me, Tahilia Rebello. So Tahilia is at One Mind at Work. I mean, that's a juggernaut of an organization that is doing already amazing things long before we came along. Another one that comes to mind is Chris Thomas at the Defensive Line, who's leading our marginalized communities task force. Again, strong presence with his wife, Martha, been around a lot longer than Stop Stigma Together has. And he's really taken the reins in his hands, and we have an exceptional group of meetings with that group, and so on. Yeah.
So such a big part of the task force design is to find people and organizations who are already doing amazing things in the mental health space. And number one, bring them together to see what they could do that they couldn't do on their own. Number two, to break down some of the silos and barriers that exist across organizations. But number three, I also think about how important it is what we're doing is that we're taking these organizations, they're already in the mental health space, but they're not necessarily focused on anti-stigma initiatives. Some of them very, very, very much are. That's their bread and butter is anti-stigma. But the majority of organizations that we work with are not specifically about anti-stigma. So a big part of what we're doing with the task forces, but also our summits and other engagement, is moving the attention of key people in these organizations toward anti-stigma. And I think that's something that's tremendously important for us to keep in mind because it's taking labor. So this is the business professor talking out, right? It's taking labor. People are already doing things in all these organizations. Stop Stigma Together is not paying for their labor, but to be able to convince hearts and minds of leaders of organizations to shift resources and shift attention to anti-stigma means that Stop Stigma Together is having a massive effect in terms of the labor that is produced once people catch their vision on it. So when you think about paid labor versus volunteer labor, right? Well, those folks are getting paid, but it's to do the job of their organization. Right? And so what a grand challenge can do is help shape the behavior and the attitudes of people who are already doing amazing work and say, if you also layer on X issue, then you're going to be that much more productive. You're going to get your end goal even better. So I think that's one of the things that I always try to keep in mind in terms of how Stop Stigma Together is changing behaviors and attitudes is we've already got these experts in mental health and we're helping them directly combat the stigma issue.
Oh, that's powerful. Yeah, I had never looked at it that way. So we're actually changing their behavior by asking them to participate in the grand challenge. And that in itself has kind of a ripple out effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Powerful.
You just take an organization, say they've got 1,000 employees, and nobody's working on anti-stigma initiative. They're just doing their thing. Well, so we go in and we get 4 or 5 employees to devote a few hours a week toward an anti-stigma initiative. Well, that's a very small drop in the bucket in terms of that organization's overall time, but that has a multiplicative effect because now that person is shaping the way that people think in that mental health organization. And we are now essentially taking some of the time of that organization and shifting it toward anti-stigma and not other mental health things that they're doing.
Right. Right. I know for me, when I'm doing a grand challenge, I'm always on the lookout for key subject matter experts that I can be creative with because, I get hired to come in and there's sometimes there's the illusion that I know everything that needs to be done. And I don't. I'm very much a process person, as are you. And so I feel comfortable with the process. And as we've already said, comfortable with not knowing what it is necessarily we're going to be doing. But I'm looking for close collaborators. And I have really found that with you and with Kat Coffin, who I will also interview. The three of us have kind of become the inner engine of Stop Stigma Together, if you will. Say a little bit about what that's like for you.
Well, I can answer that a couple of ways. On the personal level, I always really thrive and enjoy being in a creative team of people that you can trust interpersonally as well as in terms of competence. And I think that's something that three of us have, right? We're vulnerable with each other of like when we're concerned about something, Stop Stigma Together, we'll say, I'm worried about this component, but we're also vulnerable with ourselves of like, I'm worried that I can't do this as well as I need to, or where can I get the help? Where can we get the help? And I think that's very powerful, a part of how we operate together. On the professional side, just being able to, again, we have our different strengths and weaknesses to be able to leverage each other's strengths is super powerful, but also then to compensate for each other's weaknesses, right? And so like we often say, like the fastest cars need the best brakes, right? So Kat will often be like, hey, you two have this wild idea and how is it going to be implemented? And we're like, yeah, that's important. Okay, good job, Kit Kat, right? And that said, Cap can very easily be the person to say, here's the next big thing that we've got to work on. And here's the swing for the fences move that we need to do. So it's not that she has any weakness in terms of big picture thinking, but I just love how she's able to hold us accountable, so to speak, for some of the things that we come up with. So to me, if you extrapolate that experience to just how to lead a grand challenge generally, I think it's very helpful to have a fairly small, tight-knit group that can provide that kind of, I think you used an engine metaphor, that the combustion, so to speak, to move things forward, but then have the broader network of people to continue advising and leading and shaping and doing a lot of things. So to me, it's been a very important part of the generative aspect of the grand challenge to have that sort of core small team that knows a lot of the details that maybe the National Leadership Steering Team doesn't know, and certainly the task forces wouldn't know because they're in their kind of pocket of the world. So to have a few people who don't have their hands in everything, but know about everything that's going on, I think is key.
Another thing that's really important is the ability to explore and learn and investigate areas where other grand challenges or other initiatives in the same area have gotten stopped. And you and I did that together when we went to visit Judge Steve Leifman in Miami-Dade. And we took a 2-day class on mental health in the criminal justice system. That was a highlight for me. I learned so much in those 2 days. Could you say a little bit about what that was like for you?
It was very powerful because as an outsider to the criminal justice world, I have zero training in it, happily know a personal experience, right? So as an outsider to the criminal justice system, it was really eye-opening to me to just understand how the traditional model works in the United States, where people who are experiencing mental illness get caught up into a criminal justice system that is not helping them get better in terms of their mental health, and it certainly isn't helping them change their behavior. And so to see an example like they have down in Miami of a completely different model of a way to treat and interact with someone who's experienced serious mental health issues that is compassionate and cost effective was really mind blowing, right? So, whichever model you want to use, if you say, oh, I care about people, how can we change the system? We have a good answer to that. If you say, I don't care about the humans, I want to see the bottom line. Like, how are we saving taxpayer dollars? It's the same solution for both mindsets. And to me, that was a very powerful takeaway because I think oftentimes as humans, we have either or thinking. In this case, we're either going to take a compassionate route or a budget friendly route. It's like, no, they have really good evidence of how being able to have separate systems like mental health courts and these systems for people who are suffering from mental illness, it solves the underlying problems for them, which changes their lives for the better. And in the long run, it's much less costly in terms of the finances, because now you've turned, instead of having them revolving through the criminal court system their whole lives, they're now productive members of society, holding down jobs, giving back to the community through peer support networks and coaching processes, etc. So it's really, I think, to me, a microcosm of the broader issue of how we can rethink our approaches to mental health and come out with that win-win rather than a either or.
And another thing I enjoyed about it was that they had these contingencies from entire states that were there. We met, I think, about 10 or 12 people from Wyoming, including the Supreme Court Justice from Wyoming. They had about 10 people from New York State, and I think Rhode Island was the third one there. And what was so cool about that was that we got to hear, a defense attorney talking to a prosecutor, talking to a state legislator, talking to a judge about an internal problem in their state. And it really gave a holistic feel for some of the challenges that the states are feeling.
Yeah, totally. And and it's such a profound example of a way to rethink systems. But I think systems, again, how do we translate this more broadly to grant challenges? You have to be comfortable thinking in terms of systems theory, right? And the approach that we learned on there is very much a systems theory approach. Let's look at police officer behavior. Let's look at paramedic behavior. Let's look at the ER. Let's look at the prosecutors. Let's look at the public defenders. Let's look at the judges. Let's look at the prison system. All of these different sectors of the criminal justice system, you have to look at it holistically as well as be able to zoom in on each of the parts. Because if all you're doing is changing one or two of the parts, the system will try to just keep replicating itself, right? This is what from systems thinking. So you have to address all of the parts of the system and say, how do we shift the thinking in this part? How do we shape the thinking in this part so that all of those different parts of the criminal justice system can start moving toward a different mental model? And to me, that's a very powerful takeaway for any kind of grand challenge, which is, okay, what's the system that you're trying to change, and have a really clear understanding of that system? Otherwise, you're going to make piecemeal change. And to me, that's not a real grand challenge. Right. Real grand challenge is understanding the systems involved and making changes in all aspects of it.
Beautiful. Yeah, well said. And then you and I got to be opportunistic and take a drive up to Broward County, where we met with Judge Ginger Lerner Wren, the presider over the first mental health court in the country. That was an exciting and fun trip.
It was great because, there we are in neighboring counties, and they have different approaches, both really good approaches, but they have different approaches to how to handle mental health in terms of the court system. So hearing different mental models was really exciting, but also to hear her passion, having been doing it for many, many years, of where the initial ideas came from and how to implement those changes, very powerful. And the things that she and others are doing in Broward County in terms of mental health reform now, it was really great to be a part of instigating some of the changes that they're doing now.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing today with the Grand Challenge. What are some of the things that you're digging into right now as we speak?
Well, we are working a lot in our workplaces task force. I'm the co-chair of that with Tahiliat, when we talked about a few minutes ago. And that's really great to be able to convene so many different people who are steeped in workplaces across the United States. So some of the people in the task force are from the mental health space. And some of them are simply from the profession. So the Society for Human Resource Management, for example, mental health is a part of what they do, but they're well represented on our task force. We have folks from the construction industry. We have folks from a lot of not-for-profits of different walks of life. So it's very cool to be able to be bringing them together and working on initiatives for the future. Other things that we've been doing on the research side, part of Stop Stigma Together is we helped to fund a special part of the General Social Survey, which is a survey that's been done for many decades here in the United States. And they used to have a segment in there around mental health stigma. So what we have now, we secured the funding to study that again. And that'll be great because we can use that to compare how things were in the past, but also we can use it as baseline data moving forward. So a few years from now, we can see how we're progressing in terms of the initiative of what areas we're reducing stigma, what areas we're not. So that's an exciting research development. Also on the research side, we've just finished in partnership with the Kennedy Forum, the first of what we hope will be many state level legal analyses of looking at laws that either reinforce mental health stigma or dismantle mental health stigma. And so this was a legal mapping study that we first started with the state of Illinois, got funding through them, and we're now hoping to get funding to do this throughout the United States. Because what that allows us to do is see very clearly where action needs to be taken in terms of rewriting laws to help destigmatize mental health. So those are some of the things that we have going on right now.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Glenn. Thank you for dipping into your experience here and the work that you're doing. And I look forward to doing the same with you in the year ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real delight, both personally and professionally, to be working with you and everyone at Stop Stigma Together. And I'm excited about what we can do over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
That's right. And here we go. All right. Thank you.
Of course.